This next idea is not so much for the pure joy of history, but more of how to push through what might be a difficult time. It's kind of the when you're handed lemons, let's make lemonade approach. I suspect that one of the reasons history is a challenge for many people is they haven't yet found a personal connection to it. It's difficult to relate to an abstract concept. It's simply easier for most of us to study something or become interested in it if we see or experience how it affects us. This is where accident and illness come in. Most people don't know a lot about a particular illness like diabetes or dementia or whatever until it hits them or someone close to them. Then the research begins. I can use myself as an example here. My husband has Parkinson's. I assure you, I have studied and learned a whole lot more about Parkinson's in the years since his diagnosis than I ever did in the years prior. You see, while the lack of desire to learn isn't a good thing, the drive to learn, once we see that personal connection, can really work in our favor. We just need to find that personal connection. And as odd as this may seem, an accident or an illness or some other condition might be the very thing that prompts an interest in some topic in history. Now, you probably won't have a pre written lesson plan for this one, so you have to create your own. But be assured there's plenty of ways to get help, and you can ask me, and I'll help too. But if one of these situations comes up, you probably wouldn't have been able to stick with your original curriculum plans anyway. So here we go. COVID-19 is an easy entry into the 1918 flu epidemic, or even the Black Plague. Or it could lead to a more positive discussion with the fight against smallpox or polio. You could launch into a study of nursing with Florence Nightingale, or Clara Barton, or Marianne Bickerdike, or more broadly, study the healthcare and hygiene of an era, let's say during the Civil War. Somebody fell, broke a bone. I focus on American history, but if you need to study the history of an orthopedic cast, you'll be going all the way back to the early history of the Greeks and the Egyptians. Need a wheelchair for a short term or a long term? Look into the very long history of the wheelchair. Did you know that there's an International Wheelchair Day on March 1st? Maybe you want to explore remedies, medicines, home remedies, herbal medicines, how to forage. What did our ancestors do? Here's how this can work. Let's say someone in your household has a cold. You wonder out loud why we feed chicken soup to people who have a cold. Google it. There's a lot of easy answers. Then you cook together, like we talked about earlier, and make the soup. You can talk about how nice it is that we have a gas or electric stove, while our pioneers cooked with a wood stove or outside over a fire pit. Maybe you put onions in that soup. You talk more about the early pioneers who planted onions and how they stored them. Remember, no refrigeration or anything else. You might want to talk about early remedies for colds and why we are glad we don't use them anymore, which might make taking current meds a little more palatable. You could study the history of infectious diseases, hygiene, sanitation. Try this one for a surprise, or at least it was to me. The most common cause of cold symptoms in adults is the rhinovirus. It was first isolated by Dr. Winston Price at Johns Hopkins University in 1956. 1956 doesn't seem that long ago to me, but it is history. You get the idea. For this assignment, choose anything that might be deemed an illness or an accident. It could be a serious thing or something very minor, depending on your family circumstances. For this exercise, it really doesn't matter. I just want you to explore making connections. Write down the illness or condition: earache, dental cavity, tonsillitis, broken arm, it doesn't matter. Then write down at least 5 topics that you can study to connect to that event. You can use events that connect directly back to the original topic, but you don't have to. They can just lead from one to another to another. Explore. Just think about it. See what you can come up with. See you next time. We have another way to connect your family events to history, and this one is a lot more fun. I mentioned to you earlier that there have been some things that have happened in my life that changed my view of history. I'd like to tell you about one of them now. It was 1972 or 3, and as part of an American history class, I was preparing a presentation about World War I. Quite honestly, I was not particularly interested in the topic. Not interested, that is, until I was talking with my paternal grandfather, and he told me about how he fibbed about his age so he could enlist in the army. Now, there's a story. I began asking him more and more questions: where he served, how he got there, what it was like, whatever details I could think of. And from that exact moment on, my passion for connecting personal stories with American histories was set. Now, my grandmother was 3 years younger, but her brother was in the army. She joined our conversation and began telling me about what was going on at the home front, how their daily life was impacted, what it was like to get a letter saying her brother had been killed in action, only to find out later he survived the war. Those stories and so many others are now a part of the documentation and stories I have recorded in our family genealogy. Connecting the people you know, or the people you have never met but are your ancestors, can build a powerful bond between history and the student. It's one of the reasons why I launched an online genealogy course for students and their families. I love, love, love seeing people's faces light up when they've dug through some old census record and found evidence of a great, great, great grandparent. Or they find an old photo and we can begin talking about who's in the photo and what they're doing, the clothes they're wearing, the horse, the pets, the house, whatever else is in the photo, all contribute to placing these people at a specific time and a specific place in history. I now have dozens of notebooks filled with precious photos, documents, correspondence, artifacts, all supported by family trees, family sheets, and other organizational tools. In my course, My Family in History, I'll be sharing over 50 years of experience as a genealogist and history storyteller. I'll put a link in your notes for today. But beyond that, maybe you're doing a unit on the United States presidents. Do you have grandparents who remember exactly where they were when they found out that Kennedy was assassinated? Most of us of that age do remember. Or maybe they remember where they were when they found out that Nixon had resigned. Or any number of other things about presidents that people still living today can tell you about their experiences. If you don't have elders in your family, you might find some at church or another place who are willing to speak with you. There are still a few World War II vets around, but their numbers are quickly diminishing. Talk to these people. They have amazing stories to tell, and we have things to learn from them and from those stories. Your assignment for this lesson is to choose some event in your lifetime. It could be global, national, even regional, like a hurricane or a fire. Outline some of your recollections. Select 5 or more related ideas that you could teach about, talk about, learn about that are connected to that event. Here's an example. The Kennedy assassination, since I mentioned that earlier. Maybe you want to talk about Kennedy's presidency. Maybe you want to then talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis. You could talk about Jackie Kennedy's tour of the White House, which was very famous in its day. That might lead you to a discussion about Dolly Madison and how she saved George Washington's portrait during the British attack on Washington, D.C. Maybe some more talk about Washington, D.C. could lead to a discussion about the Washington, Jefferson, and Lincoln memorials. It goes on and on. Or you can study genealogy. It's a lot of fun, whichever one you choose. We'll see you in the next lesson.